Hi, everybody. My name is TJ, and I am the Director of Partnerships at the Elections Group. For anybody who's joining us for the first time, the Elections Group is a team of election experts supporting election professionals through collaboration, thought leadership, and elevating best practices. Everybody at the Elections Group has worked in an elections office, so we know firsthand the challenges faced by election officials, and we use that real world experience to help you solve those challenges that you experience. We are very excited. I think this is our third or fourth in this series of webinars with the Center for Election Innovation and Research in the Mechanics for Democracy Laboratory at Arizona State University. Very excited to be hosting this with them, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
I'm Chris Mann, the Research Director at the Center for Election Innovation and Research. CEIR is a nonpartisan nonprofit that works with local and state election officials around the country and on both sides of the aisle. Our research is to support election officials with practical analysis about election administration, and then secondarily to inform the public about how elections work to increase confidence in the election system. We're excited to be partnering with TJ and the Elections Group and the Mechanics of Democracy Lab at ASU. The series that you are seeing, this is the fourth, we have a couple more coming, is to highlight the most useful research for election officials that came out of June's Election Science Reform and Administration Conference that was hosted at Florida State. Today, we're talking about insights on administering mail ballots, specifically research on faster verification, better processes, and safer tabulation. We're thrilled to have a full expert panel today with Will Caveche from the King County, Washington Elections Office, Steve Lund from US Digital Response, which is a civic organization where he connects election officials with pro bono assistance from tech professionals, Gretchen Mock and Leonie Atte from the Engineering for Democracy Institute at the University of Rhode Island School of Engineering, Mindy Romero from the University of Southern California School of Public Policy, and Liz Stark from the University of Pennsylvania. Each of these experts is going to present a handful of slides on actionable insights for election officials about administering mail ballots. TJ and I will then moderate a short discussion with them, but we know today's topic is going to generate a lot of questions, so we plan to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Please use the question and answer function on the lower right of your Zoom screen at any time to drop the questions in, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Will to talk about the research that they did on making identity verification for mail ballots more efficient.
Yeah. You can go ahead and hit the next slide. So Washington State runs elections fully by mail. And basically every ballot has to be signature verified before we can count it. So something we've known for a long time from that experience is that signatures don't work for everyone. Most people, but not everyone. So for a long time now, our King County Elections Director, Julie Wise, has advocated for allowing additional ways for voters to verify their ballot other than signatures. And as part of that, you can hit the next slide, we partnered with US Digital Response, Steve's here from, which again is a phenomenal organization that pairs volunteer technical experts with government organizations like us. Sorry, back one slide. Partners volunteer technical experts with government organizations like us. They did research for us on ways that we could supplement signature verification that would be feasible for us to implement and that voters would be comfortable with. They ended up giving us two recommendations. The one we went with was providing an ID number like their driver's license. So last year, we were finally able to convince our state legislature to pass a bill allowing us to pilot alternative ways to verify a ballot. And since we already had this method that USDR had laid out for us, we could jump right into just operationalizing it, essentially. There were a lot of factors for us to consider. I think next slide now. But the key things that we were focused on here were making sure it was obvious to voters that it was optional. They could still give us a matching signature if they wanted. We wanted to make sure that it was accessible for voters, especially because voters with disabilities were one of the key audiences we were trying to help with this new method. and that there was minimal disruption to how we currently process ballots because we didn't want to have to completely overhaul that for this test. I think maybe slides were a bit out of order, so next slide's probably the USDR stuff. Yep. So those are the two things they recommended to us. Again, we went with state ID. Next slide. So what we ended up doing is we developed an online portal with a vendor that we regularly work with, Democracy Live, where voters could go to pre-verify their ballot before turning it into us. Voters on that portal had to enter their name, their date of birth, the unique ballot ID number associated with the physical ballot they were holding, and then either their driver's license number or the last 4 digits of their social. This portal had a secure API connection back to our statewide voter registration database. So the cool thing was it was verifying all that information in real time and making sure it was accurate, and it wouldn't allow voters to move on to the process if it wasn't matching information in a voter registration record that was eligible to vote in the election. If the voter was successfully verified, that API connection also flagged the ballot back in the registration database, so we knew to process it accordingly once it returned to us. Next slide. We ran our pilot during an April special election that we had earlier this year, which by pure coincidence ended up being a countywide election. Hitting the stats just very, very briefly here. About 10,000 voters used the alternative verification method and opted to do that instead of sign, which ended up being about 2.67% of the ballots we counted in the election, though there were certain groups that used it at a much higher concentration than others. Our signature challenge rate ended up being 0.45% for the election, which admittedly was not significantly lower than some other recent elections that we've had, but was the second lowest challenge rate that we've had in over a decade, which is something we were really proud of. And then we surveyed voters after the election. We got a lot of positive feedback, and over 91% of them said they'd be willing to do it again in the future.
Thanks, Will. We're going to go to Mindy next. All right, give me a second. Working on the making sure that we get the technical side here correct. All right. And Mindy. Here we go.
Okay, thank you, Chris, very much. Hello, everyone. I am Mindy Romero from the University of Southern California Center for Inclusive Democracy, and I'm going to talk to you about vote-by-mail rejection rates and signature curing in California. Next slide, please. So we have just a few minutes for all of these data, so I'm going to go through these slides very quickly. Of course, you'll have the slides afterwards to review, and there's many more things I'm sure that you'll want to look at and think about beyond just the data points that I'm highlighting. I think the report that I'll be covering is going to be in the chat, but that was a QR code as well. Next slide, please. BBM use in California. Next slide. Okay, so I'm sure probably everybody on this call knows that California, as of 2020, automatically sends. Oh, Chris, we can see your run of show document. You're sharing that too, or somebody is. Okay, thanks. Of course, as of 2020, California started automatically mailing every registered voter a vote-by-mail ballot as of the general election. But we've been increasing our use of vote-by-mail for quite a long time, for at least the last decade and a half, a pretty steady increase. You can see here for every general election, the blue portion of each of the bars, the proportion of the overall ballots that were cast that were actually vote-by-mail ballots. So up to 87% in the 2020 general, 2022 general, 87%. And then in our most recent general, 2024, we did slip a little bit in terms of that proportion down to 82%. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this now is focused on 2024 general election, the pie of all ballots cast. And you can see that all those vote-by-mail ballots aren't being returned just solely by the mail, of course, right? Actually, 33% were via a drop box, returned via drop box, another almost 33% by mail, but then also 16% at a drop-off location staffed vote center or polling place, and then, of course, 18% in person. Next slide. Rejected ballot rates. Next slide, please. Okay. So in any given election, of course, there is a certain small proportion of voters who get their vote-by-mail ballots rejected. In California, though, that's a large number. We see fluctuation over the years. In 2024, it was 0.9, so just shy of 1% of all VB ballots rejected. But in our state, that equated to 117,000 rejected ballots. Next slide. There has always been historic variation in terms of the likelihood of your ballot being rejected based on the demographic group you're in. I'll just show you briefly some numbers. Our report goes into much more depth and shows data for many more groups. But here are just a few slides. So rejection rate was higher for Latinos, 1.2%. Next slide. Much higher, it always is, for young people as well, 3.3% rejection rate for 18 to 24-year-olds. Next slide. Again, going through these fast. Let's look at reasons for ballot rejection. Next slide. This is the pie of all ballots rejected in the 2024 general and the reasons that those ballots were rejected. And you can see the number one reason is 59% was non-matching signature. It's always the top three: late, no signature, non-matching. Because of time, I won't show you this broken out by subgroup, but just know that there can be pretty notable differences across demographic groups in terms of the most likely reason why they get their vote by mail ballot rejected. And that's important when you're talking about outreach, right? Voter education, preventing a ballot being rejected, how you're targeting your messages to different groups. So younger people have more of an issue with non-matching signature. That can be different for older voters, Latinos versus African Americans versus whites versus Asian Americans. There's fluctuation, and even by party and by gender. Next, please. Okay, and then you all, I think, know what a ballot tracking service is. In California, we use Ballot Tracks, right? It's a ballot locator and notification system. Just a quick note here, in that QR code, you go to our website, hopefully, to check out our most recent research on vote by mail rejection. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a couple of reports that we've done research on ballot tracking on California specifically, as well as a few other states. And that research, I can't talk about today in depth, but just want to point you to the fact that we've looked at this question about whether ballot tracking services increase the level of confidence in the voting process. How does it impact rejection rates and cure rates? And we did find some data that support that, as well as a lot of data that we learned about how people are thinking about ballot tracking services and how they're using them. Next slide. And lastly, just to leave you with a couple of thoughts. We always encourage that conversations around how we can avoid signature rejection, of course, at county election offices, the processes and procedures, right, that are implemented in terms of verifying those signatures, but also how we can prevent rejection in the first place, how we can avoid it through that outreach, that voter education. Most voters do not know that they even get their signature verified, that it has to match right what's on file. And then, of course, the curing process, education and outreach around that. Thank you very much, Chris.
All right, thank you. Again, switching slides here for a second, we're going to hear from Liz Stark, who's going to talk to us about Pennsylvania and the ballot curing process there. All right, and
okay, great. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Liz Stark, and I'm excited to share with you this research that's co-authored with Mark Meredith and Michael Morse on saving lost votes by mail, evidence on vote curing from Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. And so we define a vote curing system as being comprised of two distinct components. The first component is notice, which encompasses both recording and disseminating information about deficient mail ballots. And the second component is correction, meaning that voters have opportunities to cast a counted ballot, whether by curing their original ballot, substituting with a replacement ballot, or switching to in-person provisional voting on election day. Next. And so we leverage Pennsylvania as a case study here because in the Commonwealth, counties can set their own notice and correction policies on top of statewide standards. Next. So for example, with notice, all counties record the status of returned mail ballots into this centralized statewide system called SURE. And in doing so, it will automatically send an email to voters who have an email on file that the status of their returned ballot has changed. But there's variation in terms of county level policy as to when they record those deficiencies. So some do so immediately, others wait until canvassing begins on election day. There's also variation in terms of what types of deficiencies are recorded, whether it's an inner envelope error or an outer envelope error. Next slide. And as it relates to correction, all counties also provide the opportunity for in-person provisional voting on election day, but there's county level variation as to what additional opportunities are available before election day itself. Next. And so our goal here is to understand how these different components of notice and correction policies affected the likelihood that a Pennsylvania voter who ever returned a deficient mail ballot was ultimately able to cast a valid vote in the 2024 election. So this is what we mean by saving a lost vote by mail. Next. So we rely on two data sets. The first is that we collected all of these daily snapshots of mail ballot statuses that were recorded in the SURE database, and that helps us identify the voters who ever returned a deficient mail ballot. Then we match that with the Pennsylvania voter file to identify who ultimately of those voters was able to successfully vote. Next. And so overall, our results indicate that there was a correction rate of about 54% out of more than 15,000 deficient ballots. Most of those corrections occurred by mail relative to in-person provisional voting. Next. Our results also show that voters had a higher likelihood of casting a valid vote when they were informed about that deficiency before relative to on election day, somewhere in the magnitude of about 25 percentage points there. Voters also had a higher likelihood when they received that email notifying them about the deficiency, and also when they had the opportunity to correct before election day. This was especially the case in counties that had the policy of automatically sending back the ballot by mail, because that actually serves as both notice of deficiency and also the opportunity to correct all in one transaction. Next. So really our main takeaway here is that we provided empirical evidence to show that when voters were provided with more notice and correction opportunities, they were more likely to cast a counted ballot. Next. And so really this underscores the significance of local election officials in providing timely information about deficient ballots, especially in terms of recording those deficiencies before election day. And finally, next. It also shows the importance of providing those additional curing opportunities before election day, especially as was the case with the policy of automatically sending back those ballots for voters to correct. Next. That is it. Thank you so much.
All right. And then our final presentation here will be by Leona Atta from the Engineering for Democracy Institute at the University of Rhode Island.
Hello, everyone. So let's talk about the noise, which can occur in the vote by mail process through machines that emitting sound. So next, please. Do you recognize this sound? Does this sound familiar to you? It's from a machine that processes vote by mail envelopes, and yes, it's loud. Next. So let's move on how we observed the noise level in the vote by mail process. So we used an Apple Watch, kind of the one that I'm wearing now, and we collected the data during an election. So we had the machine, and we had the position 1 where the worker was like loading the machine, and position 3 where the worker was unloading the machine after the ballots and envelopes went through the machine. Next, please. So let's talk about the results for position 1, the position where the worker is loading the envelopes into the machine. So we looked on 3 different operation types. We had on, where the machine was just on and not processing any envelopes. Then we had scanning, where the signature and the barcode was scanned. And then we had cutting as an operating, where the envelope was cut open by the machine. We had either 1 or 2 machines who were operating simultaneously, and we observed for this specific machine 2 counties in one state. So what we can see on the right side of the graph, that when we have 2 machines who are cutting simultaneously, that the decibel level is above 80. So what does it mean? That means that it kind of starts now that hearing damage can occur. So based on standards, it's not like really like you need to start providing something now, but you should start thinking of something. What can we do to help our workers? Next slide, please. So when we look on position 3, shown in this graph in gray, we see when we look again on the right side of the graph with like 2 machines are cutting, that for both counties that the level is above 85 decibels. So depending on the noise level standard, you're looking at, if you're looking on the US standards or on the European standards or any other standards from any other country, they are like slightly different. If they're saying like 80 decibels, 85 or even 90 decibels, you should start taking action. But most of them are saying 85. So when you have 85 decibels, the standards are recommending to provide PPE, so personal protective equipment for the workers, because hearing damage, either temporary or at some point permanent, can occur. But also what we can see is when we have in position 3, the person who's unloading the machine, that when we have 2 machines who are scanning, that even there at 80, like that for one county it was above 80 decibels. So we're like, even with like the scanning operation, the county should start thinking about it. What we also can see about this graph is that even if it's the same machine, which we observed, that it can be slightly different based on the county, which depends on the environment where the machine is operating. Next slide, please. So the takeaways that we took away from our study is that the noise level is in the most cases underestimated in the vote by mail process, and with like talking to election officials and administrators in multiple counties across multiple states, it was like, oh, it's that loud, so it's above this level of like we should start thinking. So the question was like, what can we do? Next, please. One part is providing personal protective equipment, PPE, for hearing. You can see in the pictures, it's either earplugs or earmuffs, which are like the most common also in the manufacturing when you have like any like industry who's like producing any parts. But also like just providing them alone, next please, is like providing is one thing, but also educating the election workers in your county is really important, because like it's like reinforcing the good habit and also like telling them like here can be a danger, and this will help you in the long term, because symptoms of high noise is not like right away that you have permanent hearing damage. It can be like sleep disturbance, performance decline, and higher stress, for example. Next slide, please. So thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. So if everyone can come back, we'll dive into our brief moderated discussion. TJ and I will be asking a few questions, and then please add questions in the Q&A. I see a few of them in there already. I'm going to start with the last presentation from Leonie and Gretchen. I have to admit that when we first started talking about noise, I thought it was going to be some fancy engineering concept. I was pleasantly surprised to find out it's just how loud it was. Leonie, you talked about this using an Apple Watch. Are there other tools that people can use to check the noise level of their machines, whether it's vote by mail machines or other machines that they're using to process ballots?
Yeah, so like most of phones in the App Store, you can download an app which can like measure the noise level. It always depends like how the error rate is. The best devices are like noise meters, but like Apple Watch or any apps give you a good like kind of recommendation, like where are you, like they are like a slight error rate of like 3-4 decibels maybe, but like if you're seeing already that you're close to the 80 or maybe even above 80 decibels, like you can like start doing more, but also like just starting to like provide personal protective equipment and start educating them of like, hey, this can be a damage or like can damage your hearing. Some people are more sensitive to it than other people, so it always depends on the human.
And I'll jump in with that. When you do use the apps or the Apple Watch, you do have to adjust for error. So when we use the Apple Watch, we had to adjust by 3 decibels. And that's just an instantaneous value. It's not taking and calculating what that instantaneous value is throughout time and throughout working there throughout the entire experience. So if you're running your machines 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, that starts to really change the calculation and shift it in terms of impact.
As a follow-up, I think for both of you, I think of lots of professions where consistent noise or high noise is an issue. And I'm just wondering, I grew up, my stepdad drove a Bobcat and he couldn't hear anything. And he wasn't an old man. It caused hearing loss at a young age. What are some things that election officials can do to protect themselves, protect their teams? And I guess similarly, what level of concern is there that becomes the long-term issue?
So in the end of my presentation, I recommended already earplugs and earmuffs, because earplugs, like, they're kind of cheap. Earmuffs can be reused. Some people have their own, like, buying their own reusable things. That can be an option. It can be also that in the machine, like, which is like a more investment than just like providing personal protective equipment, is like trying to like emit the noise at the source, so at the machine, to try to like talk to the vendors of like, hey, can we do something there? But also like just talking about when can it happen. It's like, I don't know, when you go to a concert and you're not wearing something and you go to a concert for 2-3 hours, and like after the concert the music is out and you still hear something in your ear, like kind of a sound, kind of a, I don't know how to explain it, but like this is like a temporary hearing loss. So usually it's going away after time, but like if this happening over time, it's like at some point temporary, and it's like starting slowly. So like I can just talk about my personal experience. It's like sometimes nice to just have them in and just be like on clouds and just be like in your own world, to like even have a better performance at work.
Yeah, and to jump on that a little bit more, I would just say that it's not necessarily the machine's fault. So we're not trying to blame the machine, but it's where that machine is located and where that space is located. So if you have shorter ceilings versus taller ceilings versus you have cinder block walls that are running it in that space, that doesn't absorb sound in the same way. So it's a lot about not necessarily just the machine and where you work on that machine, but also the environment surrounding that machine and how much noise is being absorbed. So taking your own individual measurements in your own spaces while everything is actively running. We saw from Leonie's presentation that cutting was way louder than scanning. What does that look like in real life for your area? And then, if you don't have 2 machines running at the same time, that's even better. So I think it's not necessarily just, oh, now everybody go buy earmuffs, but what does it look like for your area? Can you measure it? Can you understand what it looks like? And giving those options. We did have one election worker in one county who was yelling at us, and all the machines were off. And they were just yelling. And we're like, are you okay? And they're like, everything's just so loud right now. And we're like, oh, okay. So sometimes you can also know it by just talking to your workers and what that looks like.
Amazing. Thank you.
We're going to go around on a quick round robin. I'm going to start with Will and Steve again, but this is a question for everybody. Since your research was done in a specific place that obviously has specific laws and regulations and practices, will you just talk briefly about which parts of your findings you think are applicable generally, and where are you more cautious that it might be specific to that place?
Sure, I can jump in here. So yeah, the options that we researched and that USTR recommended were informed from the beginning by what was most feasible and viable for King County as a jurisdiction. That said, I would hypothesize that going to a secure online portal and providing a driver's license or the last 4 of your social, or even getting a one-time password to your phone, if that's part of your voter registration, would be a pretty common and accepted experience for voters anywhere if it was implemented smoothly. And while our results weren't conclusive on this because of a smaller sample size, I'd also hypothesize that voters anywhere would have similar concerns about uploading a photo of themselves or providing some other biometric passkey due to concerns over privacy or potential discrimination that were expressed by some of the feedback. In terms of like the caution about particular to the place too, I would say if you're in a state that isn't all male like Washington or hasn't been for as long as Washington have, your voters might experience the potential alternatives very differently, just because their comfort and experience with the absentee ballot process might be different, and the options that are most feasible for your jurisdiction might be altogether different.
Mindy?
Thanks. I was reading the questions in the chat. Well, obviously, there's a big variation across the United States in terms of the use of vote by mail, right, and the proportion of all ballots cast that are vote by mail. But I would say it's a pretty, we have some evidence from other places around the country, and I think it's pretty safe to work under the assumption that you're going to find differences, whether you have a large vote by mail population or a small vote by mail population. In your state, you're probably going to find differences by rejection rate, by use. We have differences across our state in terms of the likelihood that just a group is going to use vote by mail or not. And certainly in the conversations around potentially preventing and curing ballots, there'd be variation as well. And all of that matters in a lot of ways, but particularly for outreach and, as I mentioned before, strategies at prevention, knowing some of those differences by demographic group, particularly by age, I think can be really helpful for election officials, wherever you're at.
Liz?
Great. Yeah, and I actually think our research on Pennsylvania dovetails quite nicely with Mindy's research. But yeah, concerns about generalizability, certainly understandable. Maybe Pennsylvania represents somewhat of a unique case because its electoral votes are often seen as central to winning the electoral college. So we might, there might be some implications of that in that voters might be more aware of the need to correct mail ballot deficiencies. We might expect that campaigns might be more active in terms of reaching out to voters whom they think have deficient mail ballots. And so there's certainly a lot more attention paid to Pennsylvania, but I would still argue that, despite some generalizability concerns, our hope is that with this research, we're still providing empirical evidence to show how counties' adoption of these different notice and correction policies still help to facilitate more voters correcting their ballots. We're able to leverage a lot of really great within state variation as well. And so I think Pennsylvania can still provide us a lot of insights into this process.
Will?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about our research necessarily, but double up on everyone else's research. None of them, I think Washington was a target for any of their research, but we've found very similar things. We've looked at our data. The University of Washington has looked at data. We found, similar to Mindy, that certain groups, people of color, young voters, et cetera, tend to be challenged more than others. We've found, similar to Liz, that when we have contact info for voters or when voters are signed up for ballot alerts, they're more likely to cure. We have the same mail sorting machines that they studied with noise levels. So yeah, the intricacies of some of it may vary, and the particulars of states are going to be different from state to state, but absolutely a lot of what these folks have been finding, I think, are universally applicable across all of us.
Thanks.
Next question.
Yeah. This is back to Will, I think. We asked you to keep this short, but I know there's a lot more data out of your study. And you're an election official, so what else did you take away from it that we didn't talk about in the brief presentation?
Yeah. Like I said, there were certain populations that used the pre-verification process more than others. The big one was we also have another online tool that folks can use to download and print off a copy of their ballot. They still have to print it and return it the same way you return any other ballot. But it's a very popular tool with our UOCAVA voters and with our voters with disabilities because they can use their home setups with screen readers and things like that. to get and mark their ballot and print it off. And because those ballots have to be processed separately, because a ballot printed on a home computer looks different than a ballot that we printed through a vendor, we have separate stats for those. And like I said, overall, it was a little over 2% of voters used the pre-verification process, but among the folks that printed their ballot at home, 60% of them used the pre-verification process. And their challenge rate had a much larger statistical shift for that group. Those printed ballots tend to have a challenge rate around 1%, and it's always higher than the main challenge rate. For this election, their challenge rate dropped to, I think it was 0.3% or something around there. So when you have this group with a higher concentration pre-verifying, there was a much more significant shift in the challenge rate for those, which is obviously a very small data point here, but it's encouraging for us. So we're excited to see if, as we do this in the future, if it expands, if that can impact the challenge rate more.
Thanks. Liz, I was talking about your research with an election official last week, and something that you skipped over, but I think is worth talking about for folks in the audience who may be in a similar situation. So Pennsylvania requires 2 envelopes, and as everybody in the country is painfully aware, Pennsylvania doesn't allow pre-processing. Yet you talked about the fact that election officials were able to report potential inner envelope problems. Can you just share the mechanics of how election officials figured out to look and see if there's an inner envelope when they're not allowed to open them until election day?
Yes. Okay. Great question. And I can take a step back and just go through the process really quick. So, a voter completes they vote their ballot, and that's what we call the inner envelope or the secrecy sleeve. They place that voted ballot into the pre-addressed outer envelope. They seal that up, sign and date the outer envelope. And so if, this ballot envelope, if it's missing the inner secrecy sleeve, if it has an incomplete outer envelope, then it's considered deficient and it's rejected, right? So based on state law, we also know that counties can't open that ballot packet before election day. So as you can imagine, it's a lot easier to look at the outer envelope and you can see, all right, is it misdated, undated? Is it missing a signature? And so that's why it's a lot easier for counties just to look at the outer envelope. But we found that actually there were a lot of really creative solutions to detect the presence of an inner envelope. And what some counties did was that they actually hole punched the outside of the outer envelope so that they could see whether the inner envelope was there or not. Some counties also deployed these scales, or they were able to measure the thickness of the envelope to determine whether the inner envelope was likely to be missing. So all of this is in compliance with state law in that they're not actually opening the ballot envelope, but there still are creative ways to detect whether they believe that there's a missing inner envelope.
I think I've got one more question before we move on to the Q&A, and thank you to everybody for putting items in the Q&A. I think this is for Steve, but also for Leonie and Gretchen. A lot of your recommendations are specific to your work with partner election officials based on the rules, procedures, and machines in their jurisdiction. I think we've talked a lot about the insights and lessons that other election officials can take away from these projects, but I think vis-a-vis kind of partnering with academics, partnering with organizations like yours, what's the process for even getting started? What does that look like? What's your experience?
Yeah, so the process for working with us at USDR is really simple. Is going to our website, filling out a quick form, and then doing a quick call to kind of understand your needs a little bit better. I think working with academics probably pretty similar, like finding someone who is like, find an email on their website, say I'm interested in learning more, and every academic I've ever met is always interested in a good question and learning more or helping make it better. Working with an organization like ours or an academic can help you add capacity to conduct this kind of research, can help you ask the right questions, sharpen those up, get deeper insights. But I'd say you also might be surprised at what you can learn on your own with informal research. You can use pen and paper, Google or Microsoft Forms, or even PowerPoint to mock up a new process, ask people to try it out, talk to them about their experience and get feedback really quickly. In my career, I've saved a lot of time and avoided some easy errors just by running around my office with a Sharpie and Post-it notes and spending a few minutes with a few different people at their desks, figuring out what I could do better and what I got wrong, and fixing it early. So you have a lot of tools that are available for you to do some really quick informal research on your own too.
So I think Steve and Mindy answered for me. We are friendly and we are, accessible. And I think a lot of it just has to do with sometimes there's this bridge or this, the academy versus industry versus government, and we have these silos. And I think one of the things that we can show by the level of individuals on this panel that we're here to support. And I think that that's what we're here to do and what that looks like. And then the relationships with King County and having that as a part of this presentation. We're here to help and support. And sometimes our relationships just happen off of conversations like this, where somebody sends me a message right now in the chat and they're like, hey, can we chat later? I'm like, yes. Or when we go and present at different conferences, they're like, hey, what about this? Or I have this particular problem, but I need to solve it by next week. Those different types of things. I know that for myself and most other fellow academics, we're always in for a great question and a great problem, and how we can help use our knowledge to help and support the election space is why we're here.
Gretchen, I'm going to follow up real quickly because election officials are probably not used to hearing from people from schools of engineering like you and Leonie, and more used to hearing from social scientists and sometimes computer and technology folks. Can you talk a little bit about what you bring to the table that's different than folks from other disciplines?
Oh, well, I don't want to compare ourselves to other disciplines. I don't know everything all other disciplines ever do, but I can tell you what we do, if that works, Chris. So for us, ultimately, we see the world, we're industrial and systems engineers. We try to look at it in terms of efficiencies and better, faster, cheaper, more sustainable. So it's the statement of you can have elections fast, cheap, and accurate. Pick two. Well, we're here to help you pick and to help you figure out if you actually have to pick. Because we look at it from a systems perspective. We simulate the entire system. We don't look at just one particular aspect. I mean, we presented on noise today because we were looking at a system and we heard the noise and Leonie's watch went off, my watch went off, and we were like, wait, what? And we're like, oh my gosh, it is loud. So then we started taking measurements, and then everywhere we went for the next few election cycles, we started taking measurements because we were really curious about what that looked like in that space. So I think as engineers, we are applied scientists. So we have science and we want to apply our knowledge and help and support the communities that are surrounding us. So I think what we try to use is a lot of the tools, the nitty gritty, like the fancy math, and working with others to help do that. We do work a lot with social scientists. We are not here to break things because it's fun, because most engineers, we like to break things and put it back together. We're here to do it in the proper way. So we're here to create actionable and facilitated change that is sustainable for anybody who's using the tools. So we actually partner a lot with social scientists so that we don't break things, because that's our normal habit. But ultimately, we love algorithms, we love math, we love trying to figure out the big problems, putting it all together. The mania behind me is real. It's not pretend. It is literally trying to figure out a tool for understanding how to calculate warehouse space. So that's who we are. That's what we do. That's kind of hopefully bringing an answer to your question without getting wildly technical or super nerdy. But
thank you. I want to combine a couple of questions here in the Q&A because they were directed at different folks about some of the messaging being used to deal with rejections or change. So Will and Steve, how did you talk about this alternative? So it was clear it was alternative. That was identified as the key piece. Mindy and Liz about some of the either changes that have happened in the states or just some of the voter education programs that you've seen in California, Pennsylvania, or elsewhere to reduce the kind of problems that we see.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick on the first bit. On the mail ballot itself, we made sure to always call it just an option that you could do this or you could sign. And for most voters using that mail ballot, it was like a QR code that you could use to access off the side, but the signature block was still there and voters could still use it. And then if you were going through that online route and printing it, it was given a, do you want to do this or do you want to just sign? So we were always presenting it as just an option for folks. I will also say to one other thing, we advertised this a little more heavily to the target audience, specifically voters with disabilities. But this first run was kind of a proof of concept run. So we actually held a little bit back on how much we kind of broadcast to the world, hey, this is a thing, because we wanted to make sure we had one run of making sure this actually works functionally before we kind of like super blast it out for future tests now that we know it works. I think we're going to lean in more on kind of really outreaching to folks and letting folks know it's there.
Mindy, I think this might be, well, Mindy and Liz, so regarding some of the high rejection rates and signatures for young voters, what are some approaches that counties can take? I imagine that there's a similar approaches that we've talked about, but how can they approach getting those rejection rates down, and what does that look like?
Sure. I actually was going to let Liz jump in, but since it's a young voters, I guess I'll take that one since I called it out in my slides. But Liz, please jump in after. So I've already mentioned, of course, outreach, right, as a lot of this, right, voter education. And I think one thing to keep in mind with young people, at least certainly in California, is the overwhelming majority of young people are getting registered, or well, they're much more likely to be registered through online voter registration than other groups. And of course, that means that the signature is being pulled from the DMV. And I think we all know our DMV signature doesn't necessarily match up to our real life signature. And so, I think I said 59%, right, of all, I gave that stat, of all rejected ballots in California in 2024 were rejected because of having a non-matching signature on their envelope. For young people, it was about 3/4, those that are 18 to 24. And so I think when they're getting registered, if it's not in the online voter registration process, anybody that's registering them, it could be an outreach, community group, it could be the registrar's office, remind them, let them know, make sure that they're aware that they have to sign their ballot envelope consistent with their signature at the DMV or whatever signature exactly is the primary signature that's on file. Young people, most Californians don't know that, and young people really don't know that. And then, of course, the signatures are changing over time as well. And so it's a good reminder for young people. So I think if you're doing outreach in your offices, for older voters, they're less likely to have a non-matching. They're more likely to have a no signature or for their ballot to be late, which, by the way, is a flip because for the longest time in California, overwhelmingly young people's ballots were rejected because they were late. And but we've changed the law in California, and it's disproportionately positively impacted Californians as long as it's postmarked on election day, received within 7 days. So that's one thing I would keep in mind, and not to be thinking about it as somebody's doing something wrong, right? It's about education, and it's also about maybe some disadvantages that our current system has for young people with that evolving signature and their more likelihood of getting registered in a way that it seems to be problematic, right, for rejections. And obviously, again, this is a very small proportion overall of the California ballots cast that are getting rejected. I just want to emphasize that. But of those that are getting rejected, we see young people disproportionately impacted.
Great, and I can take the question in the Pennsylvania case. I can address that in probably two different ways. The first, thinking just about the design of the ballots. So recently there was a kind of redesign of the mail ballots, and some really great kind of innovations there in terms of highlighting on the outer envelope, like where people had to sign. Part of the date was pre-filled. So really trying to reduce some of the outer envelope errors that people might encounter. Certainly those innovations in terms of having the hole punch on the outer envelope, and by making the inner envelope a different color. So I think it's like a bright yellow color. So it makes it a lot easier for voters to kind of see the process here and make sure that they're adhering to all of the requirements. The other thing I would say, I saw a question about how does the automatic notification work with the Sure system. And this is a really great feature that of Pennsylvania with this centralized database, which is that whenever the election officials go in and enter the status, it will automatically send a notification to the voter if they had an email on file when they applied for their mail ballot. So there's no additional step that the election official has to take beyond just recording that status into the Sure system, and it will automatically go out to the voters. One other thing I would just emphasize is that, that process of entering in the statuses of the returned ballots is really important for getting that notice out there. And our research indicates that when voters are provided with more time and more notice, then they're more likely to correct their ballots.
Chris, I don't know if you want to pull one from the Q&A. To fill up a little bit of time, I got a message from some folks' favorite Deputy Secretary of State about the fact that 3 of the people on this call are from Rhode Island, and he was very proud of that.
I think for the sake of time, as we get close to wrapping up here and close to the top of the hour, I will ask everyone to just go around in another quick round robin and reiterate sort of 1, maybe 2 top takeaways from your research that you want people to leave this webinar with. So we'll go in the order we started. So Will and Steve, you're up first.
I'll jump in first. An alternative verification method and tools like this work. They're doable and they can help voters, particularly certain populations, have their ballots counted. And also academics and folks like USDR are incredibly helpful and you should engage with them.
Steve, you want to turn? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say to add to that, I mean, you can learn a lot and make sure you're headed in the right direction from just a little research, whether you're doing that with an academic, whether you're doing that with professional researchers or doing it on your own.
Mindy?
Yeah, I just want to recognize that election officials, of course, have a lot of data in-house, and I know many of you are actually, trying to learn more about the voters that you serve and investing in outreach. Even when you don't get the funding to invest in outreach, you do it anyway, as best you can. And so as much as researchers or others in the field can be helpful to you, that's how I think of it, is that as of service. It's not about our research, although we like to partner to help produce better research with all of you, but we want to be of service to you. And I just want to recognize that there are a lot of election officials out there already thinking this way and using the data and doing really good work. And lastly, I put a note in the chat about ballot tracks. Some of our data has shown that youth don't use ballot tracks as much either, at least in California and a couple other states that we've looked at. And so that's a tool if you're thinking about using it or use it now, understanding your who's using ballot tracks and the variation across groups, because we know that young people are not as aware of ballot tracks to begin with, and then aren't using it in the same rates as older voters.
Great. And I think my takeaway from our research is basically that when voters are provided with additional opportunities for correction, when they're provided with timely notice, they're much more likely to cast a counted ballot. And so in that way, we hope that there are policy solutions out here that can balance, the administrative burden that I know, this is a busy time for election officials leading up to election day, but hopefully that there's a way we can find a balance between providing voters with enough notice and opportunities for correction and ensuring that it doesn't burden election officials too.
Gretchen and Leonie?
I can start. I think the research showed that noise, or based on our conversation with election officials and our own experience going out there, is that noise is often underestimated in many environments and not only just in the vote by mail process and using machines. So just do your own measurements. There are many free apps out there. If you have an Apple Watch, use the Apple Watch or any other fitness app, which has like maybe some like noise meter, and then just check the noise, check if you maybe need to provide hearing protection, and also educate your election workers of like using it, because just providing them is not helping if they don't know that they should use them. So thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I'll end with adding that vote by mail as is a process. And that process is very similar to manufacturing plants that have existed since the Industrial Revolution. And it's not manufacturing ballots, obviously, and it's not manufacturing results, obviously, but it is a serious series of processes that we are integrating humans and machines in a known environment. And there's a lot of different interactions that have existed in literature for a long time that engineers can assist with. And this is one example of how we can do that with helping you understand noise levels and helping protect your workers.
All right, I think we are at the end of our conversation for today. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Chris for his excellent moderation. We will be doing a special Engineering for Democracy webinar next month with Gretchen and her team. We're really excited about that, so we hope folks join us. Right now, we're tentatively planning for September 11th. Again, thank you to everybody who joined us. Thank you to everybody who listened in. I've put the email addresses for the researchers in the chat. As always, at the elections group, our inbox is open. If you have any additional questions, email us at support@electionsgroup.com. Thank you, and we will see you all next time. Thank you.